Okay. Now let me make y'all host.
All right. Did you get the dings and stuff again, Brandon?
I know. You think that's funny, right?
No, I'm sorry, Susan. I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
Y'all have a good walk. Okay, Tim, I'm making you co-host, and Rebecca.
Fear not. I'm admitting no one right now. It's so ridiculous how much of like a habit it is, though. When Brandon made me coach yesterday, I'm like, oh, I gotta go mute myself, and then I was like, oh wait, admit all, and that's like that slow motion thing where it's like, don't lock the keys in your car, and you're watching yourself as you do it, and you're like, what am I doing right now?
It is totally fine.
No. All right. Let's see.
We pull up our stuff. Oh, wait, I don't think that's what we want. Now, Becky, you see like what a we're just teachers, you know?
I totally get it.
We're just teachers.
Yeah.
So, okay, running this show.
So Susan, just so you know, I'm actually thegardenofenglish.com. It doesn't really matter.
I didn't do this. This is what Nicole sent. Did you tell her to?
I did. She said she fixed it, but I don't know. It's okay.
Okay.
Though.
This is what she had linked. So I'll make a note and check on that.
No, it's not. At the end of the day, if people go there, it's going to just come
They'll
to a
be
big
redirected.
Red well, it's a big red page that says, we have moved to thegardenofenglish.com. That's all. But nonetheless, that's even my old image. I should have sent over my new image. What am I? Some sort of slime box here.
Okay. So Becky, what do you need? So I'll be here the whole time. Tim's going to hang around at the beginning and he'll help admit people. I'll help admit people too. So you don't have to worry about any of that. I'll manage the chat. I'm going to be here the entire time. Tim's going to take off after he admits people. And I'll be here the whole time, so I'll help manage the chat at the end. Do you want to do like any Q&A or?
Yeah, I'm thinking this will probably take, depending on how wordy I get, definitely between 30 and 45 minutes for the presentation, and we'll have time if there are questions. Yeah.
That sounds good.
You're an English teacher. That means 55 minutes with 5 minutes for questions. I appreciate that.
Basically, I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
And Becky, tell me where you are again, what school you're at.
So I teach at Uniontown High School, which is about an hour south of, it's in Pennsylvania, an hour south of Pittsburgh and about 30 minutes north of Morgantown, West Virginia.
Okay.
So if I have an accent, that's my Pittsburgh accent.
I didn't realize that Pittsburgh had an accent. What is it like?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like if you say downtown in Pittsburgh, it's downtown.
Oh, okay.
You have a real mush mouth issue.
Well, I'm from Massachusetts, so I know what it's like to kind of have those kind of speech issues. And then when you go places that people are like, oh, you're from Beantown, it's like, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just admitted people, so we have people jumping in now. Y'all can go ahead and keep on talking. It's like 7:59, so it'll take. What do y'all have? My phone like says 7:57. My computer says 7:59.
I'm at 7:58 there, Susan.
Yeah.
Of course you are. So hey everybody, welcome. We're admitting people, getting people in. So okay, 58, I see. So we'll give everybody a couple of minutes. It takes a while to admit, but while y'all are joining, welcome. So excited you're here with us tonight. It's going to be another great night of learning. And yes, you're already doing it. Drop in the chat just where you are. where you're located. So love seeing where everybody's from.
And I have to tell everybody I'm outside so that my dogs don't bother me. So the setting sun is kind of, but it'll be all right.
I like it. It's been raining here all day in Atlanta. Welcome, everybody. We'll give everybody a minute or two to get in. Welcome, welcome.
So many places. This is
I know,
awesome.
it's so fun, right? Oh, there's Clay, Alabama again. So I went to high school, Hewitt-Trussville. The only person who will know that is the person who just put there from Clay, Alabama.
Sedona, Arizona. I loved Sedona. Beautiful place.
Jerry out in Texas teaching an API this week. That's awesome. Tim and I both did APSIs. Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Okay. Here we go. Let's get started.
Susan, just real quick. I think just so you know, on this account, that if you want to allow someone to ask questions, that you have to actually unmute them, that person yourself.
Yeah.
So just a heads up on
that's
that.
Good.
Okay.
That's totally good. Okay, here we go. So we are going to go ahead and get started tonight. As you know, or you may not know, but you're about to know, Mosaic Perfection Learning has sponsored us only in that they are paying for our Zoom account, because we didn't have the Zoom capability. We just never imagined last year that we would have so many people. So Perfection Learning is paying for that for us. So we really appreciate that. And then Marco Learning has been helpful to us. These other places, these are just like our kind of side hustles, but honestly, like, we're all educators. So check out the Garden of English, check out AP Lit Help, Stallworth Publishing. These are just places that you can find us. Oh, we don't want to watch that. Okay, that was last night. That was earlier. Tonight, I'm excited that Becky Rittenour is with us. She is a teacher in Uniontown, at Uniontown High School in Pennsylvania. She'll tell us a little more about herself as she introduces herself, but really excited about learning from her tonight. And then we're off until next Sunday. You can scan this and get a link to the Perfection Learning, the book, the AP Lit book that Brandon Abden, which I am not Brandon Abden, by the way, I'm Susan Barber, but that Brandon Abden and Becky McFarland worked on. There's a link to where you can find out information about that. I helped edit that. It's fantastic. I didn't do any of the writing, but it's a great book. And then Tim Freitas, he worked on the AP Lane book that is there as well. That's Tim's workshop coming up. Again, that QR code will take you to that at the end of the summer. So excited about that. Unless you're like me and you go back to school the end of July. That's what we do down here in the South.
That's why we made evening sessions available, just so you know.
Okay, so the end of July, yeah, and he did make evening sessions available for that. And if you want to order a Mosaic t-shirt. Next Sunday night, Dr. Jennifer Fletcher, she's amazing, Jen Fletcher. And then here's our set for next week. So that's all from me. I'm excited. I'm going to turn it over to Becky, let her share her screen. Again, just shout out to this whole Mosaic committee for coming alongside of me when I have crazy ideas and saying, we're crazy too, and we'll help you. So thanks to Tim Freitas, Nikki Wilson, Brandon Abden, Jackie Stallworth, Christy Sato, Alfonso Carrero. We're just doing this because we like serving teachers and we like learning alongside of all of you. And it really is an honor for us to serve y'all in this way and for us to learn in this way too. So I'm excited to be with y'all tonight. Becky.
Okay.
Excited for you. Let's go.
Okay, so I will introduce myself briefly, just a little bit about me, and then I'll share my screen as I'm doing this. I will tell you that that it is it's a different kind of thing for me to do. It's not showing me my files to get right now. Here, let me see if I can go through my Google Drive. No, I can't get to my share screen. Anyway, it's different for me to use Zoom because I usually use Teams at my school. So this is, if I get my share screen going, it'll be great. I don't know why.
Send that to me if you want to share it with me, and I can share it if that's easier for you.
Maybe. Let me see. I don't know why it's not showing up on any of my options. Let me see if that'll. No, it's not. Oh, see the fun that we have here at teaching literature. So anyway, while I'm figuring this out, a little bit about myself. So I am Becky Rittenour, and I teach at Uniontown Area High School. And that is about an hour south of Pittsburgh and about half an hour north of Morgantown. And that's again in Pennsylvania, and Morgantown, of course, is in West Virginia. But so if I was explaining earlier, if I have a little bit of an accent, that's probably my Pittsburgh accent coming out. So let me send my presentation link to you, Susan.
Okay.
So anyway, but if you, it should be, let's see. I think I sent it, I believe.
Did you send it via email?
Via the Gmail, yes. Or
okay.
did you want it in the chat?
No, that's good. You can drop it in the chat too. But
okay. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat because if anybody is interested, it's on Google Drive, and it's set up so that anybody with the link can view.
Okay.
So there's that. Anyway, so while we're kind of waiting and we're figuring this all out, so I am from Uniontown, and I've been teaching for 22 years now, which just seems incredible to me. I remember the first year like it was yesterday, it feels like, and it's kind of crazy. But there we go. There I am. So I've been teaching for 22 years. I currently teach AP Literature, but I also teach the honors, which is kind of our pre-AP class of 10th grade, and then an academic 10, which is heterogeneously grouped. And I have been an exam reader now for 3 years and plan on trying again next year for that as well. And then my email is there. It's in yellow, so it might be hard to see, but it is litwithrit@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out and email me if you'd like. And I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. It's so exciting. I'm nervous, I've got to say.
You're going to be great.
But it's like getting on a horse, right? Like you just know what to do. And I want to also thank all of the teachers. A big shout out to every single one of you for making it through this incredible year. I can say that it was one of, if not the most difficult years of my career. And so the fact that you are all sitting here this evening, hanging out with us and learning with us is a testament to what we do as teachers. And I just want to thank you so much for all that you put in. I know how hard it is to do what we do, and it's not missed. So thank you all for doing what you do. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rolling in the presentation here. So do any of these things sound familiar to you? You may have heard these when you're teaching from time to time. Have you heard anybody say to you, math is better than English? Have you heard English is too subjective? Has anybody ever said, I can totally BS my way through English class? It's not hard. I can make it up. Literature is just too touchy-feely. I like hard data, right? I've got kids who say that all the time. Or you're just making this all up. You know, is that really what that means? How do I know that that's what that means? If you've ever heard these things, then what I want to show you today is why we need to explicitly teach patterns and structures that exist in literature so that students who are like that, we can actually get them on our sides a little bit. So how do we help students see that studying literature is not subjective? It's not this mystical process. I was not, as an English teacher, born with all of the answers, you know, nor were you. Those kinds of things. So how can we do that? So one of the things that I want to be able to do is to teach students to see the systems, the processes, the patterns that kind of undergird literature. And so one of the things that I've shown you here, this is a picture of a quilt. If you know anything about any kind of art at all, any kind of artistic expression, you know that, for instance, in this picture on the right side of that, or on the left side of that picture is what the quilt would look like on the side that is presented. And on the right side of that picture would be the back side or the wrong side of the quilt. And so what our students a lot of times see is that picture on the left that is just the finished quilt. And they don't really look at what the specific artistic moves are. And that's kind of what that backside, the wrong side of the quilt, shows to us. So if you click, when we are reading literature for fun, and in my opinion, I think that we're more concerned with that surface. We're looking at kind of the surface story. We're just getting involved with the characters and that kind of thing. But if we click again, it's, you know, when we're reading for analysis, we really want to look at that backside, the artistic moves. What does the artist do? What does the writer do to show me, you know, the way that this literature is working? And so that's something that I want us to look at. And again, you know, how do we do this? Another thing that I think that we need to do would be that we need to teach students to recognize and interpret patterns, broken patterns, and or the absence of patterns. So the first picture here is a pattern. The second picture is a broken pattern. And then the third picture that will come up is kind of the absence of patterns. And if we teach students to look for these patterns, I think that we can give them a toehold into the literature, because then if they are looking for a pattern, they can ask themselves why. Why is the author really using this pattern? What is the purpose of it? And then if a pattern gets broken, why is this pattern broken? There's a purpose to it. And if there doesn't seem to be a discernible pattern, why is that? Because it's almost always intentional. The writer is doing something by, you know, creating that kind of style. So we want to look at that when we're teaching this to our students, right? So why should we teach students about patterns? Well, if you don't know, the human brain, it really likes patterns. There's a ton of ways that you can do this. There have been a lot of studies, but what I've kind of shown you here is that this was a study done at Ohio University, and I just pulled a quote out of it. And one of the things that they noticed is that humans try to detect patterns in their environment all the time because it makes learning easier. Right? So if we are looking at, you know, this has happened over and over and over again, as a child, I can predict that it will happen again. And if it doesn't happen, then my brain goes, ooh, why doesn't that happen? Why didn't it happen? And I pay attention to that. So we want to use that innate ability that we have and put this into play with literature. We want to show our students how to make the use of that. So what are some kinds of patterns that we should teach our students to look for as they study literature. So I start off with teaching, and I explicitly teach these things. It's one thing to say that we teach story structure or story shape, but I explicitly teach the students to look at these as patterns. So if we look at story structure and shape, just throw this in the chat. What are some things that you would notice that would be a typical, that would be associated with a pattern in story structure or a pattern in shapes? What are some things that you notice? And I'm just going to kind of read them as they pop up. I won't get all of them, of course, but absolutely. So I'm seeing lots of, the hero's journey, the quest, absolutely nonlinear styles. If we look at Freytag's pyramid is a pattern, right? We know that things have a beginning, middle, and end. The frame story, absolutely. Plot diagrams, archetypes, all of those things, absolutely. So those are things that I would absolutely intentionally teach to my students and show them, hey, these are some patterns, some structures, some shapes that stories kind of follow. All right, let's look at this one. And again, keep putting stuff in the chat. That's awesome. I'm not gonna be able to read all of it right now, but I promise I'll go back later. Character types and functions. So what are some examples that you can think of with character types and the functions that they have in literature that shows us, these are patterns, these are structures that we can look at? Absolutely. You guys are naming all the foils, mentors, the trickster, the femme fatale, the parental figure, absolutely. Sidekick, right? Pretty much any Marvel movie, any, Batman, you've got Batman and the sidekick, Christ figures, absolutely. They appear in so many works of literature, right? So it's explicitly teaching that to my students and saying, pay attention to that, that's important. And then the last one might be a little tricky, but this is AP, you've got it. Figurative language and imagery. What are some patterns that you might pick up on with figurative language or imagery in literature? What kinds of things would you notice that are associated with figurative language or imagery, right? Colors, absolutely. Repetition, absolutely. Light and dark images, seasons, right? Absolutely. Allegories, allusions. Every one of these is spot on. And so if we teach these explicitly to our students and say, listen, these are things that exist. They exist in literature, they exist in the world. And it's kind of a shorthand way for a writer to reference something. And it's a system for you to pick up on. Okay, so in addition to that, this is kind of just click it until the slide fills out. But if you look, this is a picture that I found on Common, just go back one, sorry, that's okay. On Creative Commons, I don't know who this teacher was, but I just found it and thought it was awesome. But I explicitly teach my students archetypes, motifs, symbols, and I give them, usually in my pre-AP class, I give them a list of some pretty standard typical archetypes that might appear in stories, whether they be character archetypes or symbols or color archetypes, whatever. And then of course I look at motifs, light versus dark, good versus evil, all of that stuff, right? So we get into that. Symbols. What are some typical things that are used as symbols in literature and other works, right? So these are things I teach, again, explicitly. Okay, go ahead on to the next slide. So what other patterns can you think of that I haven't mentioned that would be helpful to teach to our students and help them to know that this is something that's going to strengthen their understanding of literature? So what other patterns can you think of? All right, yeah. Themes, yes, I have to explain that theme does not just come out of the air. We can actually find the theme. Shifts and poetry, absolutely. I teach them to look explicitly for words like but and so. Absolutely. Juxtaposition is one of my favorite things to teach. Totally. Even just Greek and Latin roots, word study, trying to show a student that this word wasn't used by accident, that we can see the application of the word and how it fits. Those kinds of things, all of that. Syntax, absolutely. Sound devices in poetry, again, a really big favorite of mine. Okay, so let's look at, these are just some examples that I use in my own teaching. So I tried to mix it up and give you a little bit of real world examples, but also literature examples. So when I teach poetry, I will often use music lyrics. I joke that my kids are gonna think that I am like the most uncool middle-aged white woman in the world, but I'll pull out some rap lyrics like nothing, right? And we analyze them. It's so awesome. So this year, and I try to update it and keep it recent. I don't want to be using stuff that's, ancient to them. It's last year is ancient. But this year I used Harmony Hall by Vampire Weekend. And we just looked at even just the first stanza, the first part of the song. And so we were looking at, in this particular set of lyrics, summertime. How is summertime used here? What do we associate with summertime? Why would the writers include summertime followed by late December and then New Year's Eve? What are the built-in associations that we have with those things? And then how might they work within this song to create a message? And we don't just grab onto summertime and then create a meaning. We have to look at how it fits in the context of the song. And so I will use this. And of course, this would become like an entire lesson, but it just as an example of something that I would do. Another example from my teaching that I might do. So Star Wars, right? Like so many of our students know Star Wars and they've seen, all those movies, Harry Potter, anything that's kind of a cultural touchstone. So with Star Wars, especially The Force Awakens, because that had been, just put out not too long ago, I really might explain that use of light and dark imagery. And I especially loved the use of light and dark at the moment when Kylo Ren has to fight Han Solo. And, you're left with that doubt, will he or won't he switch sides and join in with his father? And the light is rapidly diminishing as he comes to that decision. And so we really like to talk about that use of light and dark imagery. So another example, let me grab a quick drink. So just go through these slowly, Susan. So Everyday Use by Alice Walker, great short story that so many of us use. I will point out to the students, let's look for things that repeat, things that show up again and again. So here I highlighted a section that talks about when Maggie is in the house fire and the description of her, being consumed by these flames, the flames blazing. And then if you click again, then we'll look at a description of her sister Dee, and it describes Dee as wearing yellow organdy. Yellow, like flame, right? And then I look at another description of Dee when she comes to the house as this grown woman, and she's wearing this dress that is so loud that it hurts Mama's eyes, and it's yellow and orange, and it's enough to throw back the light of the sun. And it's just, actually throwing heat waves on Mama. And the gold in her earrings too. All of these things are a pattern. They're there for a reason. So if we look at this, we just did this in my AP class this spring and the kids loved it. They looked at that use of color and specifically, the yellows, the oranges, the golds, and we compared Dee to fire, and specifically the fire that burned Maggie, because even though she's not literally that fire, she becomes figuratively that fire. And I can show students that I didn't just make this up. If you look, the author gave us all of these clues, right? It's all there. And one last one, I have to put the Hamlet in here because it's just so much fun to teach. I love Hamlet. So with Hamlet, I love to set the kids up from the beginning with foils, and I want to show them the patterns of Hamlet Laertes, and Fortinbras. And I show them how each of these young men have things in common, especially as the story develops. And I have no doubt that Shakespeare was really trying to play each of those off of one another. I mean, for goodness sake, they literally are using foils in, and the pun in Act 5. And so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about that 5-act plot structure. That's a pattern, right? So Shakespeare followed that pattern in many of his works. And so, I'll tell the students, pay attention, look for, does this follow that pattern? If it doesn't, why might it? Why might it have broken it? And of course, we can't not talk about symbolism and figurative language with Shakespeare. It's too rife, right? So those are just some things that that I would explicitly teach in my own classroom. And just briefly, again, these would become full works, but it just gives you a taste, right? So let's practice a little bit. This is an exercise that you could use in your own classrooms if you wanted. So I used the short story Birthday Party by Catherine Brush. A lot of people from being in the AP Lit group on Facebook, I've noticed that a lot of people use this or incorporate it in their teaching of literature somewhere. And if you don't, it's so quick. It's such a quick read that it becomes super easy to throw in and use as an introduction lesson. So I'm not going to read the whole short story because even though it's 3 paragraphs, we have much more to talk about. So let me just show you some of the patterns that I might ask students to pick up on. So the first thing I might ask them, and these are literally the kinds of questions that I might ask. Let's start with story structure. Let's start with the shape of the story. So what patterns related to story structure or shape do we notice? And then in the blue here, I give you some typical kinds of answers that my students will give. This story has a definite beginning, middle, and end. It centers on a specific conflict. What's going to happen because this husband has become embarrassed by this cake and the song at the restaurant. What are some possible purposes? So you can't just stop with noticing it. You then have to think about why it's there. What's the purpose for it, right? So what are some purposes for it? And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about, using this traditional story structure, but it kind of becomes broken because when we're reading traditional stories, we're used to that conflict coming to a point, to the climax, right, and becoming resolved. Well, in this story, it doesn't really become resolved. It becomes more complicated. And we see that this is not the relationship that we were expecting it to be. So that structure, that story shape becomes something that we investigate as a pattern. Another pattern that we'll look at would be, we want the kids to look at characters and characterizations. And in this story, some of the patterns that we might notice are that, in the beginning, we're led to believe that this is a couple that's kind of just very quiet, typical, ordinary. It's described that they're unmistakably married, right? So they've kind of just fallen into this rhythm with one another, apparently, right? But then that's broken when that cake comes in and the song starts and they're not what we thought. There's something else going on in this relationship. They're not quiet. They're not ordinary. This is not a quiet and ordinary marriage. This is not quiet and ordinary characters. This is not a quiet and ordinary occasion. And then I'll ask the students, okay, why? What are possible purposes? And again, I want to be really clear when I do this with the students that we talk about these as being possible purposes. I don't ever want the students to think that there is only one way to interpret a piece of literature, but that we are using the structures and forms that undergird it to come up with and back up a possible interpretation, right? So again, a possible purpose here is by breaking that expectation for and of this couple, the author is showing us that there's not, this is not a surface kind of relationship. There's more depth here than we've been aware of, right? And something that we weren't expecting to happen has happened. So we need to think about why. So then maybe I'll talk about figurative language and imagery. In this particular short story, there's not a ton of figurative language other than symbolism, which we'll get into, but we discuss the imagery in it. And so some of the things that students will show or notice is that this couple is being described as ordinary, typical, predictable. The woman is even described as fadingly pretty. So it's kind of this used sense, right? Like just kind of not fresh, not new. But when the birthday cake comes out, the birthday cake is described as like this glossy, gorgeous creation. And the woman is later described as crying beneath this big brim of like her best hat. So, she, even though she is fadingly pretty, put effort in and put this beautiful big hat on. So those are some patterns. What might be the purposes? And again, the kids can think about this, and this becomes a whole lesson. And some of the answers that they'll give me might include that by trying to, somebody said earlier, juxtaposition, showing that balance, that difference between this normal, bland kind of couple and this glossy birthday cake, by showing the emotional state of the wife and contrasting it with the hat that she's wearing. We're getting a good picture of what's really going on in this relationship, and it's not what it looks like on the surface. So then maybe we'll look at archetypes, motifs, symbols, tension all over the place, Beth, absolutely. So with motifs and symbols, I specifically will look at the symbols of the candle and the cake, and I'll ask the students, like, looking at the story, what are some objects here? What are some potential symbols that might mean something beyond what we see? And they can quickly come up with a list that we explore. And the candle and the cake are some of the ones that show up again and again when I teach this. So then we ask, what's the purpose? And then when we explore this, we kind of think about, what are candles and cakes for? And so a cake is usually for something celebratory. A cake and candles are used, to show new beginnings, to when you're turning a year older or you're starting a new phase in your life, right? So what does that mean for this couple that seems to be very kind of settled in their ways, for this to be a break with what that was for them? And so again, I'll explore that with the student. Then we start we kind of have to start pulling this together, right? So if we look back at what we've found so far, then I want the students to look for patterns of ideas and concepts in all of their answers up to this point. What are some things that keep showing up again and again? And this is in my classroom, the way we get to theme, because I want them to see that the author is building this throughout the piece. And it's not something that I just pull out of the air. There really is evidence that shows that the whole time, this is what the author was setting up for me. And so there's, this description there on the side of the different things that show up throughout the story that help us to build to that theme. I'm not going to read all of that, but if you'd like to check it out. And then the final question. Then I want them to start thinking about the meaning of the story as a whole. So now that we've read all this, what might be the meaning? So, maybe we'll explore the idea of new versus old, and what might the author be saying about new versus old? Maybe she's trying to show us that we have this tendency to fall into old habits and patterns, that breaking those habits and patterns isn't always easy, and it's not always welcomed. And that's a complex idea, instead of just, things change and people. We want it to be more complex than that. And by showing them some of those repeating ideas, I think it helps us to get to that complexity. Another possible one that we look at is appearance versus reality. Again, we see this couple who appears one way and then they end up being something completely different. And so we'll flesh this out, we'll discuss it, and we get to this idea that what we see is not the whole picture. There's much more going on under the surface in most situations than is hinted at in the surface story. Okay, so what are the benefits of explicitly teaching students to pay attention to and question patterns. So here's what I've noticed. First, I loved this image of old ways not opening new doors. The way that I was taught literature was, here, take this poem home, read it, come back tomorrow, be prepared to tell me what you think of it. And then we sat for 30 minutes and listened to our teacher tell us what it meant. And that didn't give me any way to get into a poem. My way to get into it was either I get it, I think it's awesome, I think it's really cool, or I didn't understand it, and so it just sucks. Old ways won't open new doors. So I had to relearn. I had to learn how to teach poetry and all kinds of things, right? So knowing how systems and patterns work in literature, I believe, can really help students to see how those same systems and patterns work in the real world. So for example, I love teaching characterization because I'll tell them, notice the patterns, look at the way the characters act. What is that showing us about them? And when that character does something unexpected, what is that showing us? And then I show them how that really relates to real life, right? Like you've got this friend. This friend has always treated you in a certain way. And all of a sudden your friend shows up in the cafeteria one morning before school and is treating you differently. Why? What's going on there? And so we're able to show my students how characterization in stories is not all that different from characterization in the real world. So I think it can show them how patterns work out here in the real world too. Another benefit of explicitly teaching these students to pay attention to and question patterns would be that we have students who are coming to us from a lot of different places. And so, we have students who may not have experience or knowledge that other students have from backgrounds, whatever. And so I think that explicitly teaching, take a drink every time I say explicitly, right? But explicitly teaching these things creates this even field for our students. So even if they're not very experienced or knowledgeable, they've got a point of entry into the literature. Yes, an anchor too, absolutely. And then I also think as a reader, I can tell you that I have seen many, many essays come across my screen and across my table when I'm in person, where you can tell a student is panic writing. They have not taken a little bit of time to breathe. And so they will usually write themselves into a good essay, but you can almost, I just want to take that kid aside and say, oh, honey, it was okay. You got there, but you didn't need to panic. But I think a lot of students will panic, right? Yes, notice and note, Sarah. Absolutely. I love notice and note. Kylene Beers, listen, I fangirled when Kylene Beers retweeted me once. I thought it was the best thing ever. I saved the email that told me that I got retweeted. It was so cool. And she commented on one of my posts on Facebook the other day, which I thought was awesome. Anyway, but yeah, so this gives our students a way to kind of organize and categorize their thinking in places like the AP exam, but also if they're reading literature that's just tough, you're encountering something that's maybe a little bit above where you've been reading. And so what do I do with it? How do I enter into it? If we give them that system, if we show them those patterns, they can really do that on their own. They don't need me eventually, right? That's the point. So another benefit would be that I really think it helps students to move from that simplicity to that complexity. And if we're looking at, especially noticing when patterns break, or noticing the absence of a pattern, I think that helps us to move to getting into the deeper understanding of the literature, instead of staying on the surface of that quilt and saying, oh, look how pretty, look how nice, and looking more at the artwork behind it. I think that's something that we need to get to. And I think this might be one more. I think so. Yes, this is it. And I think it really, and this is something I know that so many of us are passionate about, bringing that equity and parity. So going back to the first point that I made of giving students who may not have experience or knowledge base, I think that this provides some of that. And so we can have students who who are not reading at a certain level, for example, we can teach that same system, that same pattern with any piece of literature. I teach the same kinds of lessons in my AP class that I teach in my pre-AP Honors 10 class, and the same thing that I teach in my Academic 10. And let me tell you, my Academic 10 has kids in it who read at a college level, all the way down to kids who read at like a 3rd or 4th grade level. And so if I can teach them these systems and these structures and these patterns, that's something that, again, kind of gives them that toehold. It creates some equity and parity. And I think we're going to open a lot of doors for kids that way. Okay. I know that was a ton. I'm really glad to get to this slide, to be completely honest, because now I'd just really like to hear from you and what questions or insights you have for me, or that you would like to share. You know, anything that you would like to have me answer or talk about.
Yeah, and I see a lot going on in the chat. It's really, really good. I know for me, this was really good. I don't think that I use the language of patterns enough when I speak to my kids. I use the language all the time of shifts, like let's look for this shift and look for this shift. And I'm all about the shifts, but honestly, like I think some of my more logical, math-oriented students who they like, I think if I just make a shift in my language and talk about patterns and breaking patterns, that's really going to connect with a lot of them. So I just thought it was really good. And then the connecting of all the patterns to themes. I don't want to talk all the time. Carrie, I'm going to ask you to, Carrie, let me look for you. And then I'm going to see if I can unmute you. And Carrie, you were in the AP Lang session. And I see a comment that you posted about a connection between these two sessions, and a lot of people following up on that. So go ahead, tell us what you observed in the connection between these two sessions.
Right. So in our conversation about looking at patterns, you know, this idea of when we're setting up a literary argument, sometimes when our students are writing, they may struggle with just checking those boxes of I've got this, I've analyzed this, but where we may fall down a little bit, and I know that I struggle with in teaching literary argument, is how do I get them to address like nuance, sophistication, and a counter argument to a literary point? Because when we're working with literary analysis, it may be a little bit difficult. So as you were talking about patterns and the kinds of questions that we ask students when those patterns break, that made me think a little bit about the idea of counter argument that was presented in the Lang session, and how looking at those broken patterns can be an entry point for counter argument when writing literary argument.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up what Susan said earlier. It's funny that she mentioned that this would appeal to her very logical students, and those are the exact students I was thinking of when I was creating this. And it's because I am like the oddball in my family in many ways, but I live with two math brains. My husband does cost forecasting for a building supply company, and my daughter does pricing analysis for an insurance company. So I am the only person over here analyzing literature all the time. And so for me, living with two people who are more math brained, although I don't really believe that's a thing, it helped me to learn that language, how to explain to them the way my brain works so that it makes sense to them. And then I have so many students who will be in my my honors 10 class who would consider themselves more math oriented or science oriented, and then they disappear and don't take my AP Lit course. And I wanted to stop that. I wanted to show them there's an entryway. This isn't something that's just, oh, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and talk about our feelings and fuzzy kittens and shiny rainbows. You know, there really is a way for you to get this. It's not something that is, you know, unteachable. So yeah, I absolutely, and I don't want to, I saw some other people commenting about how do we get kids to move on beyond that rigid structure. And I try really hard to make sure that my students don't see this as the only way. This is an entryway. So I use an analogy a lot of training wheels on bicycles. And I'll say, you know, you don't, if you ride a bicycle, I'm sure you don't still have training wheels on it, right? But you needed them for a little while. And so these are tools. These are things that we use when we are not sure what to do, or we need a little more extra help. And so I will use that analogy a lot. Yeah. So that's cool that you're seeing that connection. That's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Who else has a question? If you raise your hand, I think I can find you. Anybody else have a question or comment? Okay, I am seeing lots in the chat, and it is 8:45. I'll give you another minute to raise your hand. And while you're doing that, I just want to say, I've been admitting people, like I'm kind of running it tonight, which is why I was slow on the slides. But I saw somebody enter in here, and I know that this person is a middle school English teacher, and probably not the only one. I just know this person because they're a friend of mine. But when I think about, like, you know, you talking about like these strategies and these things, like good strategies, they work across any grade level and they work across any text. But to see middle school teachers, 9th and 10th grade teachers coming to this and applying these same strategies that we're talking about in AP, I love this, love this. So for all of you, like, shout out to all the teachers here, but like for, you know, middle school teachers, people laying the groundwork, early 9th and 10th grade teachers, like, yes, yes, yes to y'all. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I would love it. You know, I as an AP teacher, but also as a 10th grade teacher, I would love it if we could start to push that concept down into those lower grades and getting those kids thinking, you know, these good thoughts early. I think that would be awesome. So totally, we middle school teachers, you, if there is purgatory, you get a pass.
Okay, anybody else before I close this out? I'm going to put the slide deck, if it's okay with Becky, I think it is, on AP Lit Help. It will be there. It won't be tonight. I will do that tomorrow. I'll have it in there tomorrow. I will also pull resources and ideas from the chat and link that in the show notes below that as well. You know what? This is great. Thank you so much, Becky, for sharing with us.
I was so nervous, so I'm glad.
No, you're great. This was great. Super helpful. It's just like the real work of what we're getting in the class and doing. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll stick around for a minute. I'll have Becky stick around for a minute, but we will see y'all next Sunday night, or this coming up Sunday night, with Jennifer Fletcher. And then in the AP Lit session next week will be Gina Cordham. So that'll be good. So see y'all there. Have a good week.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the awesome comments. You're making my head bigger. It's great.
Thank you, Becky. That was great.
Oh my gosh, I was so nervous. I'm so glad.
You're good. Yeah. And I'm not sure, like, why the screen sharing wasn't.
I don't know why. It was just weird, but it worked out. Well, you know, we're teachers. Yeah. We adapt.
Exactly. We've adapted for the last year.
Constantly adapting. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So Anybody want to say anything to Becky? I'm going to close this out in just a few minutes, but I will, if anybody has anything, let me know, and I will unmute you if you have a small group question.
And feel free to email me, you know, I'm always open to that. Yeah.
Okay, let me hear, hold on 1 minute. Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you all. Seriously, this whole group, you know, the AP Lit Facebook group too, and all of you are what got me through the last school year. I think a lot of us felt that way. The Mosaic last summer was so helpful. You know, I think I was so overwhelmed trying to figure out, oh my God, you know, and it was just good to see that other people were going through the same thing. So I'm so happy that it's happening again this year. And yeah, thank you. Just thank you for doing what you do and for being there so that we can all be there for each other.
Yeah, because I mean, we're all going through this, but yet we just so many times feel like we're isolated, but we're not, you know? So you know, it's just a matter of coming together. So thanks for sharing this space with us.
Bye.
Anybody else? Well, I am going to close us out tonight. Becky, again, thank you so much. I will post this tomorrow, and y'all have a great week.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for all your help.
Bye. Thanks.